In the vast river of time, there are some civilizations that feel like they were born from a dream, and Egypt is one of them. Rising from the arid deserts of North Africa, this ancient land flourished because of one thing, a river. The Nile. The longest river on earth, winding like a blue ribbon through the golden sands, gave life where none should have existed. Every year, the Nile would flood, predictably, patiently. And with each flood came rich, dark soil, a gift the ancient Egyptians called Kemet, the Black Land. On this narrow strip of fertile ground, early humans began to settle. They planted barley and wheat. They built their first homes. And for the first time, they stopped wandering and started building a world. They watched the sun rise and set, traced the paths of stars, and learned to feel the rhythm of the river. Their world was one of deep connection to nature, a world where every flood, every sunrise, every breeze was a message from the gods. There were no pharaohs yet. Just people who looked to the eastern sky and imagined divine forces watching over them. Perhaps it was this quiet awe, this daily act of looking up, that gave birth to one of the richest spiritual systems in human history. To them, death wasn't the end, it was just a journey, a passage down the river into another life. At the time, Egypt was divided into two lands, Lower Egypt in the north, and Upper Egypt in the south. They were different. They fought. But they also shared a common tongue, a shared sky, and a shared belief that the world was more than what they could see. Each village had its own gods. Each field, its guardian spirits. And behind this peaceful, ancient rhythm, something was stirring. A change. A king was rising. A ruler who would bring the two lands together and start something far greater than anyone could have imagined. His name was Narmer. Long before the Great Pyramids pierced the skies, and long before pharaohs were etched into stone, there was a time of division. Upper Egypt, the southern, mountainous land, and Lower Egypt, the lush delta to the north, each had their own rulers, their own crowns, their own gods. And while they shared a river, they were still very much apart. But then, came a man named Narmer. His name is whispered through the annals of history, carved onto ancient palettes and temple walls. No one knows exactly where he came from, or how he rose to power. But what we do know, is that he changed everything. Narmer was more than just a king. He was a symbol. A warrior. A unifier. Wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, he became the first ruler to bring the two lands under a single banner. The two lands were no longer enemies, they were one kingdom. One Egypt. Legend says the unification wasn't without struggle. Narmer may have fought bloody battles, crushed rival chieftains, and brought rebellious towns to their knees. But when the dust settled, a new order had emerged. An order where one man stood above all others, not just a king, but something closer to a god. With this unification, a new era was born, the first dynasty of Egypt. Narmer established his capital at a place called Memphis, near the meeting point of the two lands. From there, he ruled over the Nile Valley, maintaining order, collecting tribute, and organizing the early Egyptian state. But power in Egypt was never just political. It was spiritual. Narmer was seen as the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship. To rule Egypt wasn't just to govern, it was to walk among the gods. Under Narmer, Egypt began to take shape, not just as a place, but as a civilization. Stone-carved records began to appear. Organized farming and irrigation systems expanded. Temples rose from the earth. And the image of the pharaoh, divine, untouchable, eternal, began to take form. The unification didn't just mark a political turning point. It marked the beginning of time as the Egyptians knew it. Literally. Later generations would look back at Narmer's rule as the moment when history truly began. And so, the two lands became one. And from that unity, a civilization rose, one that would last for more than 3,000 years. With Narmer's unification came more than just peace and borders. It brought something deeper. A belief. An idea. That the one who ruled Egypt was not just a man of power, but a vessel of the divine. The people began to speak of him not by name, but by title. Pharaoh. Derived from the words pharaoh, meaning great house, the term once referred to the royal palace. But in time, it would come to mean the ruler himself, his body, his voice, his will. The pharaoh was Egypt. And Egypt was the pharaoh. This idea did not appear overnight. It took shape slowly, like the flow of the Nile. In the stillness of temples and the rituals of priests, the image of the pharaoh was molded into something godlike. He was Horus in life, the falcon soaring high above the land, sharp-eyed, watchful. And when he died, he became Osiris, lord of the afterlife, ruler of the dead. It was a cycle. Eternal. A pharaoh did not just live for his people. He lived beyond them. And so, the earliest pharaohs began to build structures not for comfort or wealth, but for eternity. Tombs carved into the earth. Mastabas, flat-roofed, rectangular structures, were among the first. Simple, yet sacred. Inside, the pharaoh's body would be wrapped, protected, surrounded by food, jewels, and sacred objects. For the Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a journey. A voyage to the afterlife, through fields of reeds and gates of judgment, where the heart would be weighed against the feather of truth. And if found pure, the soul would live forever. To prepare for that eternity, everything had to be in order. The pharaoh established laws, not written in scrolls, but carried in memory, enforced by officials, passed down by priests. Land was divided, crops taxed, labor organized. A great bureaucracy began to form, like the roots of a tree beneath the surface. Silent, but essential. And around this god-king, a society began to rise, farmers, artisans, priests, scribes, all working in rhythm, guided by the sun, the seasons, and the river. Their lives were simple, yet sacred. For to serve Egypt was to serve the gods. From these early days, the heart of Egypt was beating. Slowly. Steadily. A civilization not built in haste or chaos, but with purpose and belief. And far in the distance, across the sands, the first vision of something far greater was beginning to stir. A structure that would defy time. That would rise toward the heavens. But that is a story for another night. As centuries passed, Egypt entered what would later be known as the Old Kingdom, a time of confidence, ambition, and divine purpose. It was during this age that the pharaohs reached higher, not just in power, but toward the sky itself. They began to build monuments not meant to last a lifetime, but eternity. It began with a single idea, that a king should not merely vanish into the desert sands, but rise again, stone by stone, toward the realm of the gods. And so was born one of humanity's greatest and most enduring wonders, the pyramid. The first of these would not yet look like the sharp triangles we imagine today. It was built for a pharaoh named Djoser, by his brilliant architect and high priest, Imhotep. Together, they created something the world had never seen before, a step pyramid, rising layer by layer above the sands of Saqqara. It was not just a tomb. It was a message. A ladder for the king's soul. A beacon to the heavens. Soon, other pharaohs followed. The architecture evolved. Stones were cut with greater precision. Angles refined. And eventually, in the desert of Giza, under the rule of pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, the Great Pyramids rose. Massive. Silent. Eternal. They were built not by slaves, as legend often claims, but by thousands of skilled workers, farmers, and craftsmen, men who labored during the flood season when the fields lay underwater. They worked not just for wages, but with pride. They believed in what they were building. For their king. For their gods. For the future. And while the pyramids climbed toward the sun, something else took shape at ground level: writing. The Egyptians began to carve their stories into stone using delicate, elegant symbols. Hieroglyphs. Not just words, but pictures, of birds, rivers, eyes, and stars. Each one held power. Each one told a story. They wrote of kings and offerings, of wars and prayers, of the journey through life and the voyage into death. These inscriptions cover temple walls and tombs, eternal messages meant to be read by the gods, or by those yet to come, thousands of years later. And so, stone by stone, symbol by symbol, Egypt declared its intent to endure. This was no longer just a kingdom. It was a civilization. One that saw time not in years, but in ages. One that measured greatness not in conquest, but in the silence of monuments that would outlast even memory. And somewhere in the shadows of those pyramids, beneath the golden sun, the seeds of even greater glory were still being planted. As the Great Pyramids cast their long shadows across the sands, the Egyptians looked upward, not just toward the sky, but toward the source of all life, the sun. To them, it was not just a star in the sky. It was a god. A creator. A guardian. Ra, the sun god, sailed across the heavens each day in his golden bark, bringing light and warmth to the world. At night, he would journey through the underworld, battling chaos, defeating darkness, only to rise again at dawn. His cycle was the very rhythm of existence. And at the heart of this cosmic journey stood the pharaoh. Not merely his servant, but his embodiment on earth. The son of Ra. A living god walking among mortals. With this belief came ritual, sacred, intricate, eternal. Each morning, priests entered the temples. They bathed the statues of the gods, anointed them with oils, dressed them in fine linens. They lit incense and offered bread, wine, and lotus flowers. These were not symbolic gestures. To the Egyptians, the gods were alive, present, and needed to be honored as such. And the temples themselves were not places of worship for the masses, but homes for the divine. Only the chosen, priests, scribes, and royalty, could enter the deepest chambers. Ordinary people would gather outside, eyes lifted, hearts quiet, waiting for the gods to accept their prayers. Meanwhile, the pharaoh presided over festivals and rituals, the most sacred of which was the Hepsed festival, a jubilee of renewal held after 30 years of a king's reign. There, the pharaoh would run a ceremonial course, proving his vitality, reaffirming his divine right to rule. But faith was not only in temples or palaces. It was in every home, every field, every breath. Farmers would leave offerings at the edge of their crops. Mothers would whisper prayers over newborns. Craftsmen carved amulets and charms to protect against evil spirits. Even in death, belief endured. The body was embalmed, wrapped, and placed in tombs with spells and guides to help the soul navigate the afterlife. It was a world where the seen and unseen danced in harmony. Where gods walked beside men, and men reached for eternity. Through faith, the Egyptians found order. Through ritual, they found meaning. And through their pharaoh, child of the sun, they believed the balance of the world could be kept. And so, beneath the glowing disk of Ra, Egypt flourished. Guided by a light that never truly set. For centuries, the old kingdom stood proud, its pyramids piercing the sky, its gods firmly seated, its pharaohs commanding both land and time. But even stone weathers. Even sunlight fades. As the 6th dynasty came to an end, the light that had once bound Egypt began to flicker. The reasons were many, and mysterious. The royal treasury weakened. The pharaoh's power, once divine and absolute, had become diluted. Provincial governors, nomarchs, grew increasingly independent, ruling their regions like mini-kingdoms. The balance between center and edge had been lost. At the same time, nature turned cruel. The Nile failed to flood, not once, but again and again. Crops withered. Hunger spread. Famine became a specter that haunted every village, every family. Without grain, there could be no offerings. Without offerings, the gods fell silent. And in that silence, came chaos. Temples were looted. Tombs desecrated. Records suggest a time of lawlessness, where neighbors turned on each other, and old boundaries no longer held meaning. The country, once whole, broke into pieces. Rival dynasties rose in the north and south, Heracleopolis in Lower Egypt, Thebes in Upper Egypt, each claiming legitimacy, each seeking the favor of the forgotten gods. The pharaoh was no longer one man. He was many. And in that division, Egypt seemed to lose itself. But even in darkness, there were sparks of light. In Thebes, a line of kings began to rise, the Intefs and the Mentuhoteps, quietly gathering strength. Their armies were small, but their will was steady. And more importantly, they brought something Egypt had begun to forget, a vision of unity. Meanwhile, the people endured. They tilled the land as best they could. They buried their dead with care, even when riches had faded. They whispered old prayers to old gods, hoping, trusting, that the sun would rise again. Because Egypt had always been more than kings and temples. It was memory, rhythm, resilience. And so, after more than a century of fracture and war, the land began to heal. From the south, a new power would emerge, one that would reunite Egypt, restore order, and usher in an age of renewal. After more than a century of division and despair, a single name rose from the sands of the south, Mentuhotep II. He was not born into a golden throne. He was born into conflict, a time of splintered crowns and uncertain futures. But in Thebes, the old spirit of kingship was rekindled, and Mentuhotep was more than just a ruler, he was a unifier. Through years of patient strategy and hard-fought battles, he reclaimed Lower Egypt. He rejoined what had been torn apart. And when the two lands were once again whole, he did something rare for a pharaoh, he looked inward. Thus began the Middle Kingdom, a time often seen as Egypt's classical age. This was not an age of grand pyramids. It was a time of reform, of reflection, of rediscovering what it meant to be Egyptian. The pharaoh, once distant and divine, now ruled more like a shepherd. He listened to petitions. He restructured the bureaucracy. He sent out expeditions to the Sinai and Nubia, not just for conquest, but to secure vital resources, gold, copper, incense, and stone. Irrigation was improved. Borders were fortified. Temples were rebuilt, not to dwarf the people, but to welcome them. Even the tombs changed. No longer hidden in towering monuments, they were carved into rock-cut cliffs, with elaborate decoration on the inside, full of texts and scenes meant to guide the soul. These tombs were quiet, beautiful, personal. And during this time, literature bloomed. Scribes wrote stories, dialogues, wisdom texts. One famous tale, the story of the shipwrecked sailor, told of magic, danger, and forgiveness on a mysterious island. Another, the eloquent peasant, offered a rare voice to the common man, pleading for justice before the mighty. In these stories, we see something remarkable, a civilization thinking deeply, even humbly, about fairness, fate, and the fragile balance of life. This was also a time when the middle class, artisans, scribes, and traders, flourished. Education gained value. Children learned to write not just for worship, but for work. Crafts became more refined, with jewelry, sculpture, and furniture showing incredible artistry and care. But beneath this calm surface, the Egyptians never forgot the lessons of the past. Order was not something given, it had to be maintained. And always, just beyond the edge of civilization, chaos waited. The Middle Kingdom stood strong for centuries. Yet, as with all things, cracks would slowly return. Not from within, this time, but from outside. For 200 years, the Middle Kingdom held strong. Egypt was whole, orderly, confident. But as often happens in long peace, complacency crept in. The later pharaohs of the 13th dynasty ruled in name, but power began to drift, again, into the hands of local rulers. Provinces grew bolder. The once tight bureaucracy loosened. And far to the northeast, in the lands of the Delta, strange footsteps stirred the sand. They were not Egyptian. They came from Canaan, Syria, perhaps even beyond. We know them today as the Hyksos, a Greek name, meaning rulers of foreign lands. But to the Egyptians, they were simply outsiders. Unfamiliar. Unsettling. At first, they came peacefully, traders, migrants, mercenaries. But slowly, their numbers grew. They brought new customs, new gods, new tools, and something Egypt had never seen before, the horse-drawn chariot. It changed everything. The Egyptian army, still relying on foot soldiers and simple tactics, was unprepared. The Hyksos swept through the northern delta with shocking speed. They didn't destroy Egypt, they claimed it. They established their own dynasty, the 15th dynasty, and ruled from the city of Osiris, adopting many Egyptian traditions, yet remaining proudly foreign. For the first time in history, Egypt was ruled by non-Egyptians. To many in the south, it was unthinkable. The temples in Thebes fell silent. The priesthood whispered of divine anger. The pharaohs of the native 17th dynasty ruled only a portion of the land, and not from a throne, but from the shadows. Yet, life under the Hyksos was not all ruin. They brought innovation. New types of weapons, stronger bows, improved pottery, and more open trade with the Near East. Culturally, Egypt absorbed much, and in time, transformed. But the memory of unity still lingered. The pride of the Old and Middle Kingdoms lived on in the hearts of Theban kings. And in one of them, a fire began to burn. His name was Seqenenretau. And he would be the first to rise, not in full rebellion, but in resistance. His actions would set in motion a new war, a new dynasty, and one of Egypt's most glorious revivals. In the farthest reaches of the south, in the shadow of the mighty mountains and deep along the fertile banks of the Nile, there were whispers of rebellion. Seqenenretau was no ordinary pharaoh. Though his reign was short, his spirit was immortal. He knew Egypt could not stay under the heel of the Hyksos forever. He fought bravely against the foreign rulers who controlled the northern lands, even at great personal cost. His life ended in a cruel and tragic manner. His body was found with wounds that spoke of close, desperate combat, yet he died believing in one thing above all: Egypt would rise again. It was his son, Ahmose I, who would carry the flame of resistance into the next stage. Ahmose, a young warrior king, inherited a fragmented Egypt. He watched as his father's dreams of a unified kingdom faded into the harsh reality of foreign rule. But Ahmose was not a man to accept defeat. No. He was a man destined for glory. Ahmose began the fight to reclaim Egypt with a single, unshakable goal: to expel the Hyksos from his land. The battles were long and hard. Ahmose and his army faced not just foreign invaders, but the weight of the past. Egypt was a land of memories, of pharaohs who had built monumental pyramids and grand temples. But now, it was a nation broken by war, divided by the Hyksos, and ravaged by generations of instability. Yet Ahmose' army was relentless. With the use of chariots, borrowed from the Hyksos themselves, and a well-trained force of foot soldiers, he slowly pushed the invaders out, piece by piece. His battles took him from the Nile Delta to the walls of Avaris, the capital of the Hyksos. And in the end, after years of struggle, Ahmose succeeded. He drove the Hyksos from Egypt. The last Hyksos king, Apophis, was finally defeated. And with his departure came the birth of a new era, the dawn of the new kingdom. It was a time of renewal, a time of expansion, and a time of grandeur. The glory of Egypt would once again be realized on the world stage. The pharaohs who followed Ahmose, such as Amenhotep I and Thutmose I, would lead Egypt into an age of military dominance, artistic flourishing, and imperial conquests. The sun had risen once more over Egypt. The Hyksos were gone, and with them, any lingering doubts about Egypt's future. The new kingdom had arrived, and it was more glorious than any before it. At the heart of this renaissance was Thutmose III, the greatest warrior pharaoh Egypt had ever known. His name would echo through history as the Napoleon of Egypt, a conqueror whose military genius expanded Egypt's borders further than ever before. Under his command, the Egyptian army was transformed. The chariot, once a weapon of the Hyksos, became Egypt's own, wielded with unmatched precision. Thutmose led his armies into battle against the Mitanni, the Hittites, and other mighty foes, stretching Egypt's reach to the farthest corners of the ancient world. But Thutmose III was not just a warrior. He was a builder. Under his reign, Karnak Temple grew into one of the largest and most awe-inspiring religious sites in Egypt. The massive obelisks that dotted the Egyptian landscape were a testament to his ambition and his devotion to the gods. And yet, there was another figure in this age of greatness, one who carved out her own legacy amidst a world dominated by men. Her name was Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut, a queen turned pharaoh, ruled Egypt with unparalleled wisdom. Her reign was marked by peace, prosperity, and monumental construction. She made bold decisions, from sending expeditions to Punt, an ancient land of wealth and spices, to overseeing the construction of her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a wonder of architecture and art. Her reign was not just one of building temples and trading wealth, it was one of building Egypt's future. Under her leadership, Egypt flourished. Arts, trade, and culture all reached new heights. Even her statues, crafted in her likeness, were made with a grace and dignity that set her apart. Her reign was a blend of wisdom and strength, a reminder that even in the male-dominated world of the pharaohs, Egypt's greatness could come from anyone who possessed the vision and will to lead. Together, Thutmose III and Hatshepsut ushered in a period of unrivaled military might and cultural prosperity. But as the new kingdom expanded, so too did the challenges it would face. The sun, so bright in the sky, would not stay at its zenith forever. After the reigns of great kings like Thutmose III and Hatshepsut, Egypt entered a period of growing uncertainty, even though it had once stretched its borders from the Euphrates to the Sudanese deserts. But the story of Tutankhamun, or King Tut, is one that has captured the imagination of the world. His name, though overshadowed by the great rulers who came before and after him, has endured in modern history, largely due to his tomb, discovered nearly intact in 1922 by Howard Carter. Tutankhamun ascended to the throne at a mere 9 years old, inheriting the mighty kingdom left by his ancestors. But though he sat on Egypt's throne, his reign was far from powerful. He was a boy, fragile, surrounded by advisors and priests who steered the kingdom's decisions. His reign is often seen as a time of restoration. The religious reforms of his father, Akhenaten, who had tried to shift Egypt's worship from the traditional gods to a single sun god, Aten, were undone during Tutankhamun's time. Egypt returned to the old gods, to the glory of Ammonius and the established pantheon. Yet, despite these restorations, Tutankhamun's reign was not marked by the great military campaigns or monumental construction projects that characterized the reigns of his predecessors. His tomb, while grand in its treasures, was relatively modest when compared to the vast burial sites of the earlier pharaohs. His life was short. He died at around 18 or 19 years old, leaving behind a legacy that, though shining brightly in our modern age, was a flicker in the grand history of Egypt. His untimely death, shrouded in mystery, further contributed to the sense of fragility that now hung over Egypt. Who could say what would have happened if he had lived longer? Perhaps Egypt would have seen another great period of peace and prosperity. Or perhaps the forces that were already threatening Egypt's power would have closed in even sooner. By the time Tutankhamun died, the new kingdom, once the pinnacle of ancient civilization, was already in decline. The priests of Ammonius, growing increasingly powerful, held sway over much of Egypt's affairs. The economy faltered, and Egypt's borders, once so vast and secure, began to shrink. The mighty Hittites to the north, and the rising Assyrian power, loomed as threats, while Egypt's internal power struggles left it vulnerable. The story of ancient Egypt, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations the world has ever known, was coming to an end. As the reign of the great pharaohs faltered, Egypt's enemies grew stronger and bolder. The internal strife and the weakening power of the crown left Egypt vulnerable, and outside forces began to push against its borders. To the north, the Hittites, once a rival, now a growing threat, began to challenge Egypt's dominance over the ancient Near East. Egypt's former allies turned enemies, and the once thriving trade routes began to dry up, further weakening Egypt's economy. And to the west, a new threat emerged, one that would prove to be far more dangerous than any before. The Libyan tribes, once on the fringes of Egyptian influence, began to push into Egypt's western deserts, carving out territories and threatening the security of the Nile Delta. But it was the Sea Peoples, a confederation of mysterious and warlike groups from the Mediterranean, that would be the final blow. Their raid struck Egypt's coasts, leaving destruction in their wake. They ravaged cities, burned temples, and tore through Egypt's defenses like a flood. Egypt, once unassailable, now seemed to be on the brink of collapse. Despite efforts from the pharaohs of the time, particularly Ramesses III, who fought valiantly against the Sea Peoples, Egypt could not recover. The nation had been wounded too deeply, and its once mighty military, drained by years of warfare, could no longer defend the heart of the kingdom. As Egypt's borders shrank, its internal struggles only intensified. The priests of Ammonius, having gained increasing power over the years, fought for control over the throne. Meanwhile, the once great warrior pharaohs had been replaced by rulers more concerned with their own survival than with the health of the empire. The new kingdom, which had once stretched its borders from the Euphrates to Sudan, was now fragmented and weak, its power a distant echo of its former glory. The final chapters of Egypt's long history were written not in the battlefields or temples, but in the ruins of once great cities, under the hands of foreign rulers. By the 11th century BCE, Egypt had endured wave after wave of invasions, first from the Libyans, then the Sea Peoples, and finally from the Nubians and the Assyrians. Each wave chipped away at the grandeur of the ancient kingdom. But it wasn't only external threats that spelled Egypt's demise. There were also the internal fractures, the loss of political unity, the growing power of the priesthood of Ammonius, and the economic struggles that made the once thriving civilization unable to sustain itself. The Nubians would briefly rule Egypt, and for a time, they restored some order to the land. The 26th dynasty, known as the Sate dynasty, would try to revive Egypt's former power, but it was short-lived. Soon after, Persians came, and Egypt became a mere satrapy in the vast Persian Empire. Egypt, which had once stood as the greatest civilization of the ancient world, was now but a province under the yoke of foreign kings. In 332 BCE, another chapter closed as Alexander the Great arrived in Egypt. The Egyptians, weary from centuries of foreign domination, welcomed Alexander as a liberator. He established the city of Alexandria, which would become a beacon of knowledge, a symbol of Egyptian culture that would endure for centuries. Yet, it was not the Egyptians who would continue to rule their land, but the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek dynasty established by one of Alexander's generals, Ptolemy I. For nearly 300 years, Egypt would be ruled by Greek pharaohs, none more famous than Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemaic rulers, who would ultimately be defeated by Rome. With Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, Egypt ceased to be an independent kingdom, falling into the hands of the Roman Empire. The great civilization that had once stretched its influence from the Nile to the Euphrates, from the deserts of Africa to the lands of the Levant, was no more. But though Egypt's political power had disappeared, its legacy did not die. It lived on in its monuments, in its art, in its science, and in the hearts of people who marveled at its wisdom. The pyramids, those eternal wonders, still stand in the desert, silent witnesses to a civilization that shaped the very fabric of the ancient world. The wisdom of Egypt, its contributions to architecture, mathematics, medicine, and art, influenced not only the Greek and Roman worlds but also the civilizations that came after them. The ancient Egyptians believed in the eternal soul, and their enduring monuments were designed not just for the living, but for the afterlife, a belief that echoed through the ages. Though Egypt's political reign ended with the rise of the Roman Empire, its cultural legacy would continue to reverberate through the ages. From the ancient Greeks and Romans to the Renaissance thinkers, from the explorers of the modern era to the artists and architects of today, Egypt's influence has been undeniable. The Greeks, most famously Alexander the Great and Ptolemy I, were deeply influenced by the culture of Egypt. Alexander, upon entering Egypt, was crowned as pharaoh, and he even visited the oracle of Ammonius at the Siwa oasis, where he was declared the son of Ammonius, linking his divine right to rule with Egypt's ancient gods. Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's generals, founded the Ptolemaic dynasty, and it was under this dynasty that the city of Alexandria, a new center of knowledge and learning, was established, housing the famous Library of Alexandria. The Romans, too, were deeply captivated by Egypt. Augustus, after the death of Cleopatra, took Egypt as a Roman province, yet he did so with profound respect for Egypt's culture. Roman emperors adopted Egyptian deities into their pantheon, and Egyptian art and architecture were integrated into Roman life. The Romans even imported Egyptian obelisks, which are still visible in cities like Rome and London today. Egypt's cultural imprint on the world did not fade with the fall of Rome. In fact, it flourished during the Renaissance, when scholars rediscovered the wisdom of the ancient world. The study of Egyptology began to take shape, as historians, philosophers, and scientists sought to understand the grandeur of Egyptian civilization. The Egyptian pyramids became symbols of mystery, knowledge, and the eternal quest for immortality, inspiring artists and thinkers throughout Europe. Even in the modern era, Egypt's influence remains profound. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter sparked a global fascination with ancient Egypt. The treasures unearthed from the tomb, golden masks, intricately designed jewelry, and painted murals, captured the imagination of the world, leading to a renewed interest in Egyptian culture. This fascination, often referred to as Egyptomania, continues to this day in popular culture, from films and literature to architecture and fashion. The architectural legacy of Egypt is perhaps one of the most visible aspects of its lasting influence. Obelisks, inspired by ancient Egyptian design, can be found in cities around the world, Paris, London, and New York, where they stand as proud monuments to Egypt's engineering genius. Modern skyscrapers, too, borrow from the massive, monolithic style of ancient Egyptian architecture. Egypt's wisdom, its artistic achievements, its philosophies, and its architectural wonders continue to inspire and shape our world today. Though the civilization itself has long passed into history, its heart beats still in the countless monuments it left behind, in the written records it preserved, and in the stories of gods and kings that continue to captivate humanity's imagination. Egypt was more than just a civilization, it was a vision. A vision of a world built on knowledge, power, and spirituality. And though its empire is long gone, its legacy is eternal. As we conclude our journey through the vast and fascinating history of ancient Egypt, it's clear that what made this civilization so remarkable wasn't just its monumental achievements or its enduring structures. It was the spirit of Egypt itself, the vision of a society that sought to blend the divine with the earthly, the eternal with the fleeting, and the known with the mysterious. The pyramids, those towering monuments that still stand today, are not merely tombs. They are symbols of immortality, of the Egyptians' belief in a life that transcends death, where the soul lives on in the afterlife. They represent the Egyptians' desire for permanence in a world full of change, a reminder that even as the empire crumbled, their vision of life beyond this world endured. The pharaohs, too, were more than just rulers. They were seen as living gods, the embodiment of divine order on earth. Their reign was meant to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic balance, ensuring prosperity, justice, and harmony in the land. This belief in a divinely ordered world, where the actions of rulers and individuals alike had cosmic significance, is something that still resonates with us today, as we continue to strive for balance and justice in our own societies. The influence of Egypt stretched far beyond its borders. Its ideas and its achievements were passed on to the Greeks, the Romans, and beyond. It inspired philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, and even shaped the spiritual traditions of the Abrahamic religions. The Egyptians' understanding of the heavens, their innovations in mathematics and medicine, and their sophisticated art and architecture became the foundation upon which many civilizations would build. Even in the modern world, we continue to draw inspiration from Egypt. The symbolism of the Eye of Horus, the mystique of the pyramids, the stories of gods and pharaohs, they remain potent, influential symbols in art, literature, and popular culture. From Hollywood films to fashion and architecture, Egypt's legacy is alive in ways both subtle and overt. Egypt's rise and fall remind us of the fragility of human civilization. No matter how powerful or mighty a kingdom may seem, time waits for no one. Empires rise, and empires fall, but the ideas, stories, and spirit of a culture can transcend the centuries. As we listen to the Nile's flow or gaze upon the pyramids, we are reminded that there are forces at work far greater than any of us, forces of nature, of time, of eternity itself. Egypt, with all its brilliance and mystery, offers us a glimpse into this eternal dance. Its civilization may have passed, but its contributions continue to shape who we are, what we strive for, and how we view the world. In the end, Egypt teaches us that legacy is not just about what we build or what we achieve. It's about the ideas we leave behind, the stories we tell, and the way we touch the lives of those who come after us. As we come to the end of our journey through the history of ancient Egypt, it is important to remember that the story of this great civilization is not simply a tale of triumph and decline. It is a story of resilience, of a people who, for thousands of years, faced the challenges of life, death, and the unknown with unwavering determination and grace. Egypt's legacy endures, not just in the stone and gold that remain, but in the ways its ideas, its wisdom, and its spirit continue to resonate throughout the ages. The wisdom of the ancients, the teachings of their gods, the lessons of their rulers, the beauty of their art, can still be found in the world today. The symbols of Egypt, the pyramids, the Sphinx, the Eye of Horus, continue to capture our imagination, standing as timeless monuments to human creativity and ambition. We may never fully understand the mysteries of Egypt, the secrets hidden in its temples and tombs, or the true extent of its influence on the ancient world. But in a way, that is part of what makes Egypt so enduring. Its mystery, its depth, and its beauty keep us coming back, generation after generation, to learn more, to be inspired, to reflect on the meaning of life, death, and everything in between. As the Nile flows, steady and unchanging, so too does the spirit of Egypt live on in the hearts of those who cherish the past, in the minds of those who seek wisdom, and in the very fabric of the world we continue to build today. So, as we finish this journey through the ancient land of the pharaohs, let us remember that Egypt's story is not just one of the past, but one that continues to inspire us. It is a reminder that the greatest legacies are not the ones we build for ourselves, but the ones that live on through the generations, shaping the world long after we are gone. Ancient Egypt, the birth of Egyptology. One of the most important figures in the study of ancient Egypt is none other than the man who is often credited with founding Egyptology, Jean-François Champollion. In the early 19th century, Champollion unlocked the secrets of the Rosetta Stone, a discovery that would revolutionize our understanding of ancient Egyptian writing and culture. The Rosetta Stone had three scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Though scholars had already deciphered the Greek text, the hieroglyphs remained a mystery. Champollion's breakthrough came in 1822, when he realized that the hieroglyphic symbols were not simply pictures, but phonetic symbols that could represent sounds. This discovery opened the door to reading ancient Egyptian texts and interpreting their meaning. Historians and Egyptologists before him had been baffled by the symbols on Egyptian temples, tombs, and monuments. But with this new understanding, Egyptology as a field truly came into being, giving scholars the tools they needed to study Egypt's civilization in greater depth. From this point forward, ancient Egyptian society could be read and understood more thoroughly than ever before. In the years following Champollion's discovery, a new wave of scholars emerged, eager to unlock the many layers of Egypt's rich history. Among them were William Matthew Flinders Petrie, a British archaeologist considered the father of modern Egyptian archaeology. Petrie revolutionized the field by applying rigorous scientific methods to his excavations, focusing on systematic excavation, recording, and dating of artifacts. His work at sites like Tel el-Hesi, Amarna, and the Valley of the Kings helped lay the foundation for modern archaeology. Petrie's approach was different from earlier archaeologists, who would often dig in an unmethodical manner, simply searching for treasures. Instead, Petrie focused on understanding the context of the finds. He believed that each artifact had a story to tell, and that by carefully examining these objects within their archaeological context, one could reveal much more than just their material value. His work brought a new level of precision to Egyptology, which has influenced the field to this day. The divine order, religion in ancient Egypt. One of the most striking features of ancient Egyptian civilization was its religion, which permeated every aspect of life. Ancient Egypt was a theocracy, where the ruler, the pharaoh, was not only the political leader but also considered a living god, specifically the god Horus on earth. The pharaoh's role was to maintain the Ma'at, the divine order, ensuring the balance of the universe, harmony, and justice. Without the pharaoh's guidance, the world would fall into chaos. Historians like Toby Wilkinson, author of the famous work The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, argue that this intertwining of religion and politics was essential to understanding the structure of Egyptian society. According to Wilkinson, the Egyptians viewed their rulers as divinely chosen, and this divine association gave the pharaoh immense authority. This concept of the divine right to rule is not unique to Egypt but found a powerful expression here, where the spiritual and earthly were inseparable. Ancient Egypt's religious system was incredibly complex, with a large pantheon of gods and goddesses. From the sun god Ra to the goddess of love and war Isis, each deity had a specific role in the cosmic order. According to Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, the Egyptians believed that their gods interacted with humans and the world around them in very tangible ways. Temples dedicated to these deities were not only places of worship but were often centers of economic power, as the gods were believed to own the land, and the pharaohs acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people. In terms of religious practices, Egyptologists like Suleyman Ikram have uncovered the significant role of burial rituals in the Egyptian belief system. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife where the soul would travel through the Duat, the underworld, to reach the field of reeds, a paradise. This belief led to the elaborate mummification processes and the building of monumental tombs, such as the pyramids, to ensure the soul's safe passage. The dead were often buried with everything they would need in the afterlife, from food and drink to magical spells written on the tomb walls. The practice of mummification was not simply about preserving the body for eternity, it was also deeply connected to the religious concept of eternal life. The Book of the Dead, a funerary text found in many tombs, contained spells and prayers that guided the deceased through the challenges of the afterlife. Egyptologist James Peter Allen, in his work on Egyptian religious texts, highlights how the rituals and texts were seen as essential for ensuring the deceased's rebirth and immortality. This focus on the afterlife and the gods' role in guiding the deceased through this journey was a central part of daily life. Temples and priests held significant power, with priesthoods controlling vast resources. The priesthood was responsible for maintaining the temples, performing rituals, and ensuring the correct performance of religious rites to keep the gods happy and the divine order intact. The hierarchy of power, Egypt's social and political structure. Ancient Egypt's social hierarchy was both rigid and deeply intertwined with its religious beliefs. Scholars like Toby Wilkinson, in his works such as The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, emphasize that the ancient Egyptians viewed society as an ordered system that was divinely inspired. At the top of this pyramid was the pharaoh, considered a god-king who was entrusted with maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order. Below the pharaoh was a small elite class, which included the nobility, priests, and high-ranking officials, who assisted the pharaoh in governing the country. For Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, the pharaoh's power was not only political but religious. He argues that the pharaoh's authority was justified by his role as the intermediary between the gods and the people. The pharaoh's responsibility was to ensure the prosperity of Egypt, protect the kingdom from foreign threats, and maintain the social order. This concept of the pharaoh as both a political and divine figure was central to Egypt's long-lasting stability. Beneath the elite, ancient Egyptian society was divided into various classes, with scribes, artisans, and farmers forming the backbone of the economy. Scribes, in particular, held a special status, as they were the only ones able to read and write. They were vital to the administration of Egypt, keeping records of taxes, trade, and legal matters. Egyptologist Salima Ikram notes that the scribes played a crucial role in maintaining the bureaucracy of Egypt, ensuring that the pharaoh's orders were carried out throughout the vast expanse of the kingdom. One of the fascinating aspects of ancient Egypt, as highlighted by historians like Geraldine Pinch, is the role of temple complexes in the political system. These temples were not just religious sites, but economic powerhouses. The priesthood, which controlled these temples, wielded significant influence over the economy, managing large estates and accumulating wealth. The religious and political power of the temples helped to stabilize the kingdom and secure the loyalty of the people. The high priests were not only spiritual leaders but were also part of the governing elite, further blending religious and political authority. Yet, while Egypt was highly stratified, it was not entirely rigid. As scholars like Toby Wilkinson and Kara Cooney argue, there was some mobility within the system, especially during times of crisis or change. For instance, under the reign of Pharaoh Amenemhat I in the Middle Kingdom, the government was reorganized to allow for more opportunities for the lower classes to rise in status. This shift allowed for greater flexibility and innovation within Egypt's otherwise tightly controlled social system. At the bottom of the social pyramid were the laborers and slaves, who worked in the fields, quarries, and on monumental construction projects. While slaves did exist in ancient Egypt, they were often prisoners of war or captives from conquered territories, and their roles were varied. Some worked on the construction of the pharaoh's great monuments, while others were employed in households or in the military. Despite the rigid structure, the ancient Egyptians were remarkably pragmatic in their approach to governance. The system was designed to maintain harmony, ensure the economy functioned smoothly, and keep the Nile's flood cycles in balance. As Kara Cooney points out, Egypt's stability can largely be attributed to the effective management of resources, the irrigation systems that fed the nation, and the leadership that was able to maintain this order through both times of prosperity and crisis. In conclusion, Egypt's social and political systems were built upon the belief that the stability of the state was intrinsically linked to the favor of the gods. The hierarchical structure was designed not only to govern but also to ensure that Egypt's land and people remained in balance with the divine forces that ruled the cosmos. The combined power of the pharaoh, the priesthood, and the bureaucracy allowed Egypt to thrive for millennia, influencing later civilizations and leaving behind a legacy of governance that continues to be studied today. Egypt's influence, the crossroads of civilization. As a civilization that lasted for over 3,000 years, ancient Egypt didn't exist in isolation. Scholars like Toby Wilkinson argue that Egypt was always at the center of a vast network of trade and cultural exchange, influencing many neighboring regions and civilizations. Its strategic location along the Nile River, one of the longest rivers in the world, made Egypt a natural hub for both trade and ideas. The flow of goods and knowledge between Egypt, the Levant, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean shaped the development of these ancient societies. One of the primary areas of influence was trade. Egypt's wealth, derived from its agricultural surplus, its mineral resources like gold and precious stones, and its skilled artisans, made it a valuable partner for neighboring civilizations. Barbara Watterson, an expert on ancient trade routes, explains that Egypt's access to vital resources like cedar wood from Lebanon and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan contributed significantly to the development of trade networks that spanned from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. In exchange, Egypt imported luxury goods, textiles, and other items, creating a rich and varied economy that was interconnected with the world. Military influence was another area where Egypt left its mark on the ancient world. Egypt's military strength, particularly during the reign of Thutmose III and Ramses II, helped establish Egypt as a dominant power in the Near East. Scholars like Kara Cooney highlight that Egypt's military expeditions, especially during the New Kingdom period, weren't just about conquest, but were also designed to secure Egypt's political and economic interests. Egypt's influence was most prominently felt in the Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, and Syria, where Egyptian troops frequently clashed with rival powers such as the Hittites and Mitanni. Perhaps one of the most famous military conflicts Egypt was involved in was the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, between Ramses II and the Hittites. This battle, often referred to as one of the largest chariot battles in history, ultimately led to the first known peace treaty in recorded history. The diplomatic engagement that followed, resulting in a treaty between Egypt and the Hittites, not only marked a major shift in Egyptian foreign policy but also had a profound influence on the development of diplomacy in the ancient world. The arts and architecture of Egypt also spread far beyond its borders. As Geraldine Pinch points out, Egyptian artistic styles, particularly in sculpture and architecture, were admired and adopted by surrounding civilizations. For example, the Phoenicians, known for their seafaring prowess, incorporated Egyptian motifs into their own artwork, and the Greeks and Romans later borrowed much from Egyptian architectural designs, including the construction of massive columns and obelisks. The iconic Egyptian obelisk, which originated as a symbol of the pharaoh's power, was eventually adopted by the Romans as a symbol of their imperial might. Several Egyptian obelisks can still be seen in places like Rome, Constantinople, and even New York City, where they have become lasting symbols of Egypt's enduring influence on world history. Egypt's influence was also intellectual. Scholars like Richard H. Wilkinson argue that Egyptian concepts of writing, mathematics, and astronomy were foundational for the development of other ancient civilizations. The Egyptian calendar, which was based on the solar year, helped lay the groundwork for the calendars used by both the Greeks and Romans. Egypt's contributions to medicine, through the works of priests and physicians, were also influential, with Egyptian knowledge of anatomy and surgical practices being passed on to the Greeks, most notably to Hippocrates, the father of medicine. Even the philosophy and spirituality of Egypt left an imprint on other cultures. The ancient Greeks were profoundly influenced by Egyptian thought. Plato and Pythagoras, for example, are said to have traveled to Egypt to study philosophy and mathematics. The concepts of the soul, immortality, and the afterlife found in Egyptian religion were deeply absorbed into Greek and later Roman philosophical traditions, influencing thinkers like Plato and Aristotle. In conclusion, ancient Egypt was not an isolated civilization but a central hub in the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. Its influence on trade, military affairs, art, and intellectual development reverberated across the ancient world, helping to shape the trajectories of other great civilizations. Egypt's legacy continues to resonate today, reminding us that its role in the ancient world was not merely one of power but also of profound cultural and intellectual influence. The decline and legacy, Egypt's fall and its enduring influence. After thousands of years of dominance, Egypt, the mighty civilization that once stood as a symbol of power, order, and immortality, began to experience a gradual decline. The question arises, how did such a powerful empire fall? Historians and Egyptologists have long debated the reasons behind Egypt's eventual decline. Scholars like Zahi Hawass argue that the fall of Egypt was not due to a single factor but rather a combination of internal struggles, external invasions, and political instability. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt was no longer the unified, powerful kingdom it once was. The Third Intermediate Period, 1070 to 664 BCE, marked the beginning of Egypt's slow fragmentation. During this time, the central authority weakened, and Egypt was divided into competing regions and rulers, often facing foreign invasions. Egypt's once strong military was no longer as effective in warding off foreign powers. This internal instability created the conditions for outside forces to take advantage of the kingdom's weakening state. The first major wave of foreign conquest came from the Libyans, who began to exert influence over Egypt's eastern regions. Later, the Nubians from the south also took control of Egypt, establishing the 25th dynasty, the Kushite dynasty. While the Nubians ruled for a time, their reign was marked by external pressure from the growing Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians, under kings like Tiglath-Pileser III, were able to conquer Egypt in 671 BCE, and despite the occasional resurgence of Egyptian power, the Assyrians maintained control for a period. The final blow came from the Persians, who, under Cambyses II, conquered Egypt in 525 BCE. The Persian Empire, which stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, absorbed Egypt into its vast domain. Though the Persians ruled Egypt for several centuries, their control was not absolute. The Egyptians would rise up in rebellion, but their independence was short-lived. The Greek conquest, led by Alexander the Great, marked yet another turning point in Egypt's history. Upon Alexander's death, Egypt was ruled by his general Ptolemy I, who established the Ptolemaic dynasty, 305 to 30 BCE, a Greek-controlled dynasty that lasted until the death of Cleopatra VII and the eventual annexation of Egypt by Rome in 30 BCE. Though Egypt had fallen to foreign conquerors, its cultural and intellectual legacy did not disappear. The Ptolemies recognized the immense value of Egyptian culture and religion, and they promoted the worship of traditional gods, particularly Isis and Osiris, while also blending Greek traditions with Egyptian religious practices. The famous Library of Alexandria, founded by Ptolemy I, became a center for learning and the preservation of knowledge. It is through this institution that much of Egypt's intellectual heritage was passed down, influencing Greek philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists such as Euclid, Ptolemy, and Archimedes. The Romans, upon annexing Egypt, adopted many aspects of Egyptian religion, art, and architecture. Egyptian deities such as Serapis continued to be worshipped across the Roman Empire, and Egyptian symbols like the Ankh, the symbol of life, and the Eye of Horus became popular throughout the Mediterranean. In the centuries that followed, Egypt's cultural and religious practices would continue to influence the Roman and later Christian worlds. For example, many scholars believe that the Egyptian practice of mummification and the associated ideas of the afterlife influenced later Christian and Jewish beliefs about resurrection and immortality. Despite Egypt's fall as a political and military power, its spiritual and cultural legacies lived on in the regions it once influenced. The influence of Egyptian religion, art, and architecture would echo throughout history, shaping civilizations that came after it, from the Greeks and Romans to the Islamic world in the Middle Ages. The Egyptians' profound understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine left a mark on the Renaissance and continues to influence modern science and philosophy. Today, Egypt is no longer the dominant force it once was, but its legacy remains an indelible part of world history. As Richard H. Wilkinson aptly puts it, Egypt's legacy is one of enduring knowledge and wisdom, a testament to a civilization that, though it has passed, continues to illuminate the path of human progress. The spread of Egypt's legacy influences across time and culture. Though Egypt fell as a political power, its cultural and intellectual legacy continued to spread and shape civilizations far beyond its borders. From the Greeks to the Romans, and even into the Islamic Golden Age, Egypt's influence was profound, leaving an indelible mark on art, architecture, religion, and science. The Greeks and the Egyptians. Perhaps the most well-documented influence Egypt had on later civilizations is seen in its relationship with the Greeks. The Greek philosopher Herodotus was one of the first to document Egypt's ancient history, often marveling at its architecture, religion, and society. In fact, many Greek intellectuals made pilgrimages to Egypt to learn from its ancient scholars. One of the most notable figures was Plato, who, according to tradition, traveled to Egypt to study philosophy and mathematics. Pythagoras, the great mathematician, is also said to have spent time in Egypt, absorbing its teachings on mathematics, geometry, and astronomy. In fact, many Greek ideas on geometry, astronomy, and medicine have their roots in Egyptian knowledge. For example, the famous Euclidean geometry that we use today was influenced by the Egyptians' practical application of geometry in building the pyramids and temples. The Egyptians were among the first to develop a system of mathematics that included basic geometry, which the Greeks later expanded upon. The Hellenistic period and Alexandria. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he recognized the cultural and intellectual wealth of the land and founded the city of Alexandria. This city became a beacon of learning and scholarship, home to the famed Library of Alexandria, where scholars from all over the Mediterranean world gathered to study Egyptian knowledge alongside Greek philosophy. The Ptolemaic dynasty, established by Ptolemy I, ruled Egypt and was heavily influenced by Egyptian traditions, yet it also embraced Greek culture, creating a unique blend of the two civilizations. In Alexandria, Greek and Egyptian scholars worked side by side, making groundbreaking contributions to astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. The Great Library of Alexandria was the largest and most significant library of the ancient world, and its preservation of Egyptian knowledge played a pivotal role in the transmission of Egypt's intellectual heritage to the Western world. Scholars like Euclid, Ptolemy, and Archimedes studied both Greek and Egyptian concepts, advancing human knowledge in ways that would shape the future of science and philosophy for centuries to come. The Romans and Egypt. When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, the ancient land of the pharaohs became a part of the Roman Empire. Despite the political changes, Egypt's cultural and religious influence continued to thrive. The Romans were fascinated by Egypt's religion, art, and architecture. Roman emperors, such as Augustus and Hadrian, were deeply influenced by Egyptian religious practices, and they even adopted Egyptian deities like Isis and Horus into their own religious traditions. Roman architecture also borrowed heavily from Egyptian designs. The iconic obelisk, which had first been erected by Egyptian pharaohs to commemorate their victories and honor their gods, was adopted by the Romans as a symbol of imperial power. Several obelisks from Egypt were transported to Rome, where they were placed in prominent public spaces. To this day, Rome is home to several ancient Egyptian obelisks, which continue to stand as lasting symbols of Egypt's cultural influence. Egypt's influence on Islamic culture. When Islam spread across the Middle East and North Africa during the 7th and 8th centuries CE, the cultural and intellectual legacy of Egypt continued to resonate. The Islamic Golden Age saw a revival of Egyptian scientific knowledge, particularly in fields like medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. Egyptian influence can be seen in the great libraries and institutions of learning established in cities like Cairo, which became a leading center of scholarship during the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars such as Ibn al-Haytham and al-Razi built upon Egyptian scientific principles, particularly in their studies of optics, chemistry, and medicine. Egyptian contributions to the study of the stars and the heavens were also integrated into the work of Islamic astronomers, who expanded on earlier Egyptian ideas about the movement of celestial bodies. Additionally, Egypt's architectural legacy lived on through Islamic art and architecture. The mosques and palaces of Cairo, such as the Al-Azhar Mosque and the Sultan Hassan Mosque, reflect a deep connection to Egypt's ancient architectural traditions, particularly in their use of domes, arches, and intricate designs that have their roots in Egyptian temple architecture. In conclusion, while Egypt's political power faded, its cultural, religious, and intellectual influence continued to shape the world long after the fall of the pharaohs. From the Greeks to the Romans, and later the Islamic scholars, Egypt's knowledge, art, and architecture lived on, influencing civilizations across time. Egypt's legacy remains deeply embedded in the foundations of modern culture, from the science and mathematics that underpinned the Renaissance to the art and architecture that continue to inspire us today. One of the most lasting legacies of ancient Egypt is its remarkable advancements in science. Long before the modern scientific revolution, the ancient Egyptians were making significant strides in fields like medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. These achievements not only shaped the course of Egyptian civilization but also laid the foundation for future developments in these disciplines. Egyptian medicine. The ancient Egyptians are often credited as some of the first people to approach medicine with a systematic and empirical mindset. They were pioneers in medical practices, particularly in surgery, anatomy, and pharmacology. The Egyptians had a deep understanding of the human body, and their knowledge of anatomy was far ahead of its time. One of the most famous medical texts from ancient Egypt is the Ebers Papyrus, which dates back to around 1550 BCE. This papyrus is a medical treatise that contains over 800 remedies for various ailments, ranging from minor illnesses to serious injuries. It also includes prescriptions for herbal treatments, many of which are still used in modern medicine. The Egyptians were especially skilled in the use of plants and minerals to treat diseases, and they were among the first to develop methods of preserving medicine in pills or ointments. The Egyptians were also pioneers in surgical techniques. Evidence suggests that Egyptian doctors performed complex surgeries, including brain surgery and fracture treatments, with remarkable skill. The famous Imhotep, who served as a vizier to King Djoser, is considered one of the earliest physicians in history. He was also revered as a god of medicine and healing, highlighting the high regard Egyptians had for their medical practitioners. Egyptian astronomy. In the realm of astronomy, the ancient Egyptians were keen observers of the night sky. Their understanding of the movements of the stars and planets was not only essential for practical purposes, such as agriculture and the flooding of the Nile, but also for religious and spiritual reasons. The Egyptians closely associated their gods with celestial bodies, and the sun and moon were central to their religious beliefs. One of the most significant contributions of ancient Egypt to astronomy was the development of the lunar calendar. The Egyptians divided the year into 12 months, each containing 30 days, and added an extra 5 days to complete the 365-day cycle. This calendar system was crucial for tracking the annual flooding of the Nile, which in turn determined the agricultural cycle. The Egyptians also used the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, to predict the annual flooding of the Nile, a vital event for Egyptian society. Moreover, the Egyptians constructed monumental structures, like the pyramids and the temples of Karnak, with an extraordinary alignment to the stars. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned with remarkable precision to the cardinal directions, and its construction required sophisticated knowledge of astronomy and geometry. The alignment of temples with celestial events, such as solstices and equinoxes, shows how deeply the Egyptians understood the relationship between the earth and the cosmos. Egyptian mathematics. Egyptian contributions to mathematics were foundational to the development of modern mathematics. The Egyptians were practical mathematicians, applying their knowledge to solve everyday problems related to architecture, agriculture, and trade. One of their most famous mathematical achievements was the development of a system of geometry. The Egyptians used geometry extensively in the construction of their monumental structures, such as the pyramids and temples. They developed methods for measuring areas, volumes, and angles, and these techniques were used to ensure the precision of their architectural designs. The Egyptian number system was based on a combination of hieroglyphs and unit fractions, and it was used to record and calculate various aspects of daily life, from the distribution of land to the management of resources. The Egyptians also had a deep understanding of basic arithmetic, including addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. They used these skills in the construction of buildings, the taxation system, and the regulation of trade. Perhaps one of the most famous examples of Egyptian mathematics is the Rhind mathematical papyrus, which dates back to around 1650 BCE. This papyrus contains a collection of mathematical problems, including those related to fractions, geometry, and algebra. The problems found in the Rhind papyrus were used as teaching tools for future generations of Egyptian scribes and demonstrate the advanced nature of Egyptian mathematical knowledge. Enduring influence. The knowledge developed by the ancient Egyptians in medicine, astronomy, and mathematics was not isolated to their time. As Egypt interacted with neighboring civilizations, these scientific achievements were passed down and further developed. Greek and Roman scholars, such as Pythagoras, Euclid, and Galen, were influenced by Egyptian ideas and integrated them into their own works. These contributions would later play a key role in the development of Western science during the Renaissance. In modern times, Egypt's legacy continues to inspire scholars, scientists, and historians. Today, we recognize the Egyptians as some of the earliest pioneers in the scientific fields that continue to shape our understanding of the world. From medicine to astronomy to mathematics, the scientific advancements of ancient Egypt laid the groundwork for many of the discoveries and technologies we take for granted today. Egyptian religion and mythology, gods, goddesses, and beliefs. Religion was the cornerstone of life in ancient Egypt, influencing every aspect of society, from the pharaoh's rule to the construction of monumental temples. The Egyptians worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, each of whom represented different aspects of the natural world and human experience. Their beliefs were deeply intertwined with their understanding of the cosmos, the afterlife, and the cycles of nature. The pantheon of Egyptian gods. At the heart of Egyptian religion was the belief in a divine order, known as Ma'at, which represented harmony, balance, and truth. The gods were seen as the maintainers of Ma'at, ensuring that the world remained in balance and that life continued in a harmonious cycle. Ra, the sun god, was the most powerful and important deity in the Egyptian pantheon. He was often depicted with the head of a falcon and a solar disk above it, symbolizing the sun's life-giving power. Ra's journey through the sky each day, from sunrise to sunset, was seen as a symbol of life's cyclical nature, and his nightly journey through the underworld, Duat, represented death and rebirth. Ra's association with the sun also made him a symbol of creation and renewal, and he was believed to have created the world from the primordial waters of chaos, Nun. Osiris, Isis, and the afterlife. While Ra was the sun god and symbol of creation, another deity, Osiris, became central to Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. Osiris was the god of death, rebirth, and the afterlife. He was often depicted as a mummified king, symbolizing the death and resurrection cycle. According to Egyptian mythology, Osiris was once a ruler of Egypt, but he was killed by his brother Set, the god of chaos and disorder, who was jealous of Osiris's power. Osiris's wife, Isis, a powerful goddess of magic and motherhood, mourned his death and searched for his body, ultimately bringing him back to life. This act of resurrection made Osiris the god of the underworld, and his story became a central part of Egyptian religious life, symbolizing the hope for eternal life and the cyclical nature of existence. His death and resurrection mirrored the agricultural cycle of the Nile, as the annual flooding of the river brought death to the old crops and rebirth to the new. Horus and the pharaohs. The myth of Osiris and Isis also introduced Horus, their son, who became one of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Horus was the god of the sky, often depicted as a falcon or with a falcon's head, symbolizing his dominion over the heavens and his role as a protector of the pharaohs. According to myth, Horus avenged his father Osiris by defeating Set, restoring order and balance to the world. This story had a profound connection to Egyptian kingship. The pharaohs were considered to be the earthly embodiments of Horus. As the living ruler, the pharaoh was believed to be the Horus on earth, and his divine right to rule was tied to this connection with the gods. The relationship between the pharaoh and the gods was central to maintaining Ma'at, and it was the pharaoh's responsibility to uphold this divine order through just rule, military conquests, and the construction of monumental temples. The role of religion in daily life. Religion in ancient Egypt was not confined to temples and grand ceremonies alone, it was woven into the fabric of everyday life. Rituals, offerings, and prayers were performed daily in homes and in the temples. The Egyptians believed that by honoring the gods through these acts of devotion, they would ensure the continued favor of the gods and the prosperity of their society. The Egyptians built temples as the homes of the gods on earth. These temples, such as the Grand Temple of Karnak and the Temple of Luxor, were not only places of worship but also centers of power and authority. The pharaohs often funded the construction of these temples as a way to demonstrate their divine favor and to reinforce their legitimacy as rulers. In these sacred spaces, priests performed daily rituals, making offerings of food, incense, and symbolic items to the gods, ensuring their continued protection and favor. The practice of mummification, which we associate with Egyptian burial practices, was also deeply tied to religious beliefs. The process was seen as a way to ensure that the soul of the deceased would live on in the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, a guide to navigating the afterlife, was often placed in tombs to assist the deceased on their journey through the underworld. It provided spells and instructions for passing various trials and judgment before Osiris, ensuring a peaceful existence in the afterlife. Religion was the lifeblood of ancient Egyptian civilization, shaping their culture, society, and understanding of the world. The gods were not distant, abstract figures, they were intimately connected to the daily lives of the people, from the pharaohs to the commoners. The stories of gods like Ra, Osiris, and Horus provided both spiritual guidance and a framework for understanding the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. These religious beliefs not only shaped the way the Egyptians viewed the world but also left a lasting impact on their art, architecture, and literature. In the end, Egypt's mythology and religious practices were a testament to their desire to maintain balance and harmony in both their spiritual and material worlds. The gods may have been many, but the central principle of Ma'at, order, truth, and balance, remained the guiding force in the lives of the Egyptians for thousands of years. The architectural marvels of ancient Egypt, the pyramids and beyond. When we think of ancient Egypt, one of the first things that comes to mind is its remarkable architecture, most notably the pyramids. These colossal stone structures, which have stood the test of time for millennia, are some of the most iconic symbols of ancient Egypt and remain a testament to the engineering ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians. The pyramids were not just impressive feats of construction, they were also imbued with deep religious and cultural significance. The most famous of these architectural wonders is the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, around 2580 BCE. Originally standing at 146.6 meters tall, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. The precision with which it was constructed is still a subject of awe and debate. The pyramid was built with around 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. The construction of the Great Pyramid was a massive undertaking, requiring a vast workforce of skilled laborers, architects, and engineers. Some scholars believe that ramps were used to transport the massive stones into place, while others suggest that the Egyptians may have employed more innovative methods. The fact that this structure was constructed over 4,000 years ago, without the aid of modern machinery, remains one of the most remarkable feats of engineering in human history. Purpose and symbolism. The pyramids, particularly the Great Pyramid of Giza, were not merely tombs for the pharaohs but also represented a spiritual journey. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh, as the living god Horus, would ascend to the afterlife upon his death. The pyramid itself was seen as a stairway to the heavens, enabling the pharaoh's soul to travel to the Duat, the underworld, and ultimately to be reborn as a star, joining the gods in the sky. The shape of the pyramid was symbolic as well. Its triangular form was thought to represent the rays of the sun, with the pyramid's apex pointing directly toward the heavens. The Egyptians' strong association with the sun and its life-giving power was integral to their religious beliefs, and the pyramid served as a symbol of both divine protection and eternal life. Construction techniques. Despite the sheer scale of these projects, the Egyptians employed impressive methods to ensure the precise alignment and stability of the pyramids. The construction of the pyramids involved not just monumental effort but also advanced understanding of geometry, mathematics, and labor organization. One of the key challenges in pyramid construction was the alignment of the structure to the cardinal directions. The Egyptians achieved remarkable precision in orienting the pyramids to true north, with the Great Pyramid being aligned within 0.067 degrees of true north. This required not only careful measurements but also a deep understanding of astronomy, as the Egyptians would have used the stars to orient their structures. Temples and obelisks. In addition to the pyramids, ancient Egyptians also constructed a wealth of other monumental structures, including temples, obelisks, and sphinxes. These buildings were often dedicated to the gods and played an integral role in the religious and social life of Egypt. The Temple of Karnak, for example, is one of the largest religious complexes ever built, covering an area of around 200 acres. It was dedicated to the god Ammonius and served as a center of worship and political power throughout Egyptian history. Obelisks were another iconic architectural feature of ancient Egypt. These tall, four-sided structures, typically made of a single piece of stone, were often erected in pairs at the entrances to temples. They were inscribed with hieroglyphs and served as symbols of the sun god Ra. The Egyptians believed that the tall, pointed shape of the obelisk represented the rays of the sun, and placing them at temple entrances was meant to harness the sun's power for the temple and its gods. The Great Sphinx of Giza, with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, is another enduring symbol of Egyptian architecture. It is thought to have been constructed during the reign of Khafre, the pharaoh who built the second pyramid at Giza. The Sphinx represents the pharaoh's power and strength, as well as the mysterious and divine nature of the gods. Enduring legacy. The architectural achievements of ancient Egypt had a profound impact on later civilizations. The techniques developed for the construction of the pyramids and temples influenced later cultures, from the Greeks to the Romans, and even inspired the architectural styles of the Renaissance. The fascination with ancient Egyptian architecture, particularly the pyramids, continues to this day, as people from all over the world come to visit these awe-inspiring monuments. The enduring nature of these structures speaks to the skill, vision, and determination of the ancient Egyptians. The pyramids, temples, obelisks, and sphinxes that they left behind stand as a testament to their belief in the divine and their desire to create structures that would last for eternity. These buildings were not only physical structures but spiritual symbols, designed to honor the gods and ensure the pharaoh's immortality.